So for a musical evening like the one we're staging, guests would arrive at the water entrance of the house by gondola. They would disembark into a courtyard or small hall, and then would ascend a grand staircase to the principal room of the house.
You know, this house really isn't Venetian in design, it's more Roman. The Buttrams built this house in the late 1930s so that they could actually have musical performances in the Great Hall. But I wonder, Jim, how is this large room different from those that Monteverdi might have used to stage his concerts in the early 1600s?
Well, Venetian palaces had a room very much like this one, where they would hold all the public functions of the family, marriages, receptions, state banquets, concerts like the one that we're staging. And to cool the rooms, they raised the ceilings, narrowed the windows down, and ended up with a lot of wall space that needed to be covered. They did that as richly as possible, silks and brocades, so much so there were even laws against how richly you could decorate your walls. Often they painted them with scenes of the gods in combat, feast and interludes of Antony and Cleopatra, naval battles in which admirals and the family had been successful. And these great vistas expanded the sense of space in the rooms.
You know, it would be impossible to find an artist willing to do that sort of thing today, and it certainly would be impossible to pay him.
Yes, yes. Well, they ornamented these rooms in other ways besides even painting. There were columns of marble or of painted wood that went to the ceiling. Naked colossi lolled about the walls. The ceilings themselves were silvered or gilded in order to pick up the lights from crystal and candles below.
Do you have any pictures of that sort of decoration?
I have a book. I'll bring it next time.
We're going this way. Start with your right foot. And I'd like you to kind of march to the music. So those going this way, foo gonna, ping, 1, 1, 3, 1. So it kind of prances along. Yeah. Okay?
Monteverdi dedicated his madrigals of war and love to Ferdinand III, who became Holy Roman Emperor in 1637, the year before these madrigals were published. Ferdinand could have been quite dangerous to Venice, you know. He was involved with the 30 Years' War, which his father had gotten him into.
Well, such a man would be unlikely to respect the dying Venetian estates on the edge of his territories, nor would he have liked Venetian opposition to his Inquisition. Yet, the Venetians might cleverly put off any direct confrontation by seeming to court this absolute prince.
And an evening's entertainment by the greatest composer of the city, with a song especially written to flatter the emperor, would cost little except the price of musicians and some food.
And might successfully lead him to hope that Venice would remain at least neutral during the war that was devastating Bohemia and the other German states. It really would convince him of the advantages of peaceful luxury like this.
1, 2, together, 1, 2. We'll use the West Gallery back here as our backstage area, and then out in the main gallery we'll build a stage machine to act as a set for the performers. Our entrances and exits will be through this doorway, but the doorway will be hidden from the view of the audience by some mechanical clouds that will part for our entrances and our exits. But tell me, Jim, how would the audience have been set up at the time of Monteverdi?
Well, if the emperor were in the audience, his chair would be in front of all the others. And behind that, princes, cardinals, ambassadors. Behind that, the ordinary nobility and other guests arranged according to rank. Sometimes there were exceptions. One writer suggests putting the prettiest girls in the front row to inspire the performers.
An excellent idea.
But usually, the seating was according to social hierarchy in an aristocratic society. Just as for our performance, the guest will be seated in a more democratic and equal pattern.
Okay, now 2 problems. It's too heavy. You must move more gracefully. Also, you must sing more lightly. Remember the words, fugano, fugano, mean let the clouds flee on this fair day. Back once more, again.
Okay, yeah, that looks good. Yeah, Gene, you mentioned, we were talking before, the clouds will be here in the back. They'll be movable. They'll go from side to side. They'll be painted in the period, or the style of the period. Sabatini, who was one of the designers of that period, shows us in his drawings how the clouds are to look. And at the early part of the show, the clouds will split here in the center, and Nigel Rogers and Carlin on the harpsichord will wheel out on a cart-like machine.
Fantastic.
And come down center. And one more time later in the show, Vicky, our dancer, will make an appearance through the clouds, and she'll come down the center and dance.
Venetian art was emotionally charged, dramatic, extremely colorful, like this painting by Tintoretto, whose works were being venerated and studied by other artists who came to Venice, especially to see them, at the very time that Monteverdi was chapel master at St. Mark's.
The colors are really very beautiful. That's what I noticed before I try to read the subject of the painting.
It is an extremely beautifully colored painting. I think it's really a modern attitude to be more interested in colors and composition than the subject of the painting. But you can imagine that painters were always interested in those things, which is the very reason why they were coming to Venice to study paintings like this, and by the paintings of Tintoretto's predecessors and contemporaries, like Veronese. Here's a painting by Veronese which is not Christian, but rather pagan in subject, Venus and Adonis.
This painting is not so emotional as it is sort of relaxed, while everything, even the tree, sort of leans towards the center.
I think that's very well described. Yes, this kind of easy, gentle, rather than forced placement of figures in the composition is another thing that was greatly admired in Venetian paintings. But probably more important than that was this tradition of color, which goes back at least to Giovanni Bellini, the teacher of Giorgione and Titian. I will show you a high Renaissance painting by Titian from 1518, the Bacchanal.
It reminds me of that first vocal solo in our ballo, Su misi recchio mai, come, bring me now a deep bowl full of the great Iberian wine. I think this love of color in Venetian painting probably parallels the colorful use of contrasting voices and instruments in Monteverdi's music.
Rubens was probably the greatest artist of Monteverdi's period. Rubens came to Venice in 1600 and was very admiring of Venetian paintings, particularly those of Titian. I want to show you a painting by Rubens, a very emotional, very dramatic painting, really, of the apotheosis of the Duke of Buckingham.
It seems as if Rubens is glorifying the Duke of Buckingham here the same way that Monteverdi glorifies Ferdinand III in the Madrigal.
Sackbuts, this has to be fuller, even louder, as loudly as you can play. The text here is, let the world resound with Ferdinand's fine heroic deeds. So more sound. Again from measure 66, please. Everyone.
It seems like we're looking up as the Duke is being carried off toward heaven. Isn't that an unusual use of perspective?
Not really at this time. There are many ceiling frescoes that are done in this way. It's as if the artist is interested in you as a spectator, standing on the floor and getting a perfect view of everything that happens. I want to show you another fresco, a very dramatic one by Veronese, that depicts the triumph of Venice. When you follow the perspective of this painting, where do you find the center of interest of the painting to be?
I think it must be up towards the top where the woman is being crowned. She must be Venice in the picture.
Yes, she's the personification of Venice. And notice how your eye is drawn to her by the perspective here and also by the glances of the people, the crowd on the balcony here.
As I look at this for a while, I feel like I'm one of the spectators.
Yes, and I think that's on purpose. The artist wanted you, Veronese wanted you to feel like you were part of the noise and the confusion of the crowd, and this is all really for the sake of participation and drama.
Just as the narrator in our Ballo will draw the audience into a dramatic flattery of Ferdinand.
Oh yes, art had no corner on drama. Monteverdi used music and drama to involve his audience, just as the painters were trying to involve the spectator. Actually, music was more innovative during the 17th century than art was. The great century of Venetian painting is the 16th century. And I wanted to point out, too, that paintings could be very grand in scale and awesome, like this Veronese, or they could be very intimate. How would you like to be greeted by this charming painting every time you open the lid of your harpsichord?
There, where you start that da-da-ta-da, make that really quite full. Back again to 24,
One suggestion
please.
might be to concentrate on length rather than strength.
Yes, very much so. Okay, back to 24. Keep those things in mind. Good.
By 1635, architects in Venice aim at stunning effects for bowling the spectator over. Its architecture is theater.
Oh, it's so intense. Look how the buildings focus right in on the spectator.
Well, sometimes they achieve an effect that gets the spectator to marvel or wonder. They do it by splendid marbles on the exterior, or by just enormous size, like this one.
I remember going to visit that one when we were in Venice. It's called the Cod d'Oro because the decorations on the front were once covered with gold.
The Buttram Mansion is restrained by comparison. However, the heavy masses on the outside of the building create light and shadow effects that are similar to the effects achieved by Venetian architects in this Baroque period.
Yes, at the time of Monteverdi, architects had gone through Byzantine and Gothic styles and were into a kind of neo-Roman style, which is very sumptuous and heavy, like this one, or you just passed one. These are both by Longhena. He's much more opulent than the earlier architects.
You know, Monteverdi's music is really similar to that in effect. You have wildly contrasting images right next to one another. In our Ballo, for example, we have two nymphs and an armed general riding around knocking down towers. It's not a logical mix of images, but a sensual one. And Monteverdi's music makes it all convincing.
Well, architects tried for the same thing in decoration, especially in the grand room where the music would be put on. The walls would be decorated so sumptuously that sometimes they even became three-dimensional, like this one.
That's part of a long tradition, really, where painters use illusionistic effects to make a very flat wall look very three-dimensional, like Veronese at Mazar.
It's very theatrical, isn't it?
Well, the Venetians are good at building stage sets.
Well, they turned their whole city into a stage set, like the ones that Canaletto painted. Here's one right here.
Well, it was part of their defense system. By making the city seem as rich and splendid as possible, they discouraged enemies from attacking her.
The museum's building was never part of the defense of Oklahoma City, but it was at the heart of the cultural life in Oklahoma City. Thousands of people came here to listen to the music, to look at the artworks, and to enjoy the gardens.
Well, such individual cultural centers were less important in Venice. They thought of each house as part of a larger unit that contributed to the well-being of the city. And it was so important that the government even passed laws about decorating your own house. Only admirals could have an obelisk on the roof, for example. And when one family's palace burned, the city contributed to building it back up because the house was so important a part of the ceremonial opulence of the town.
We need patronage like that today.
Oh, yes. The result of that patronage in Venice was really marvelous to behold. There was art and music and palaces and churches and all those splendid buildings reflected in the canals.
It sounds like you're stealing Coryat's lines. An English visitor went there in 1611 and he recorded in his diary as he sailed across the lagoon. I saw Venice, which yieldeth the most glorious and heavenly show upon the water that ever any mortal eye beheld.
I was trying to put in a little garland around my cup of wine there, you see. Yes. Yeah, it's nice. I think for piano, a full cup, I should put as if it's sort of spinning over the edge.
All right. Do you want to go on or do that again?
Well, I'd like to do the correndomi al cor di vena vena, the bit about the wine running to his veins. That's, I don't know quite how to... Correndomi al cor... I expect that will come with the action that when we're...
Should get fast with correndomi, running
Yes.
through my veins.
Yes. Yes, I think I'll do rather a pretty fast embellishment on vena because it's a long note. Something rather more elaborate than before.
Crin di fiori, cigli di occhi,
che per beltà donne e donzelle, gite superbe di mortali onori, movete al mio bel suon le piante snelle, sparso di rose il crin, leggiardo e biondo, e lasciato dell'istro il ricco fondo, vengan, vengan lumine ninfe al ballo anch'elle. then. She brings his hand to me. Sorry, I beat you to it, didn't I?
Did you want a shorter pause?
Well, no, it should be as long as that. I mean, I was too soon.
Need the time.
Yes, yes. So. She brings it, takes off the back along, I suppose. Il prindi fiori, She puts me on the garland over my head.
Yes, then a chord.
Io per